The autumn rain hammered relentlessly against the tall windows of the Asheville Heritage Conservation Center, creating a rhythmic percussion that echoed through the spacious restoration workshop. Outside, the North Carolina mountains were shrouded in mist, their autumn colors muted by the gray October storm. Inside, Sarah Mitchell adjusted her magnifying headset and leaned closer to the oil portrait lying flat on her workbench, her breath shallow with concentration. The painting depicted a young woman in her mid-20s, dressed in the modest but carefully maintained clothing typical of Appalachian families in the 1880s. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, revealing a pale, elegant neck. But it was her eyes that had captivated Sarah from the moment the piece arrived 3 weeks ago. They held a peculiar mixture of determination and sadness, an intensity that seemed to follow the viewer no matter where they stood. Sarah had been working as a senior art conservator for nearly 15 years, ever since completing her master's degree at the Winterthur Museum. She had developed an almost intuitive connection with the pieces that passed through her hands, sensing the stories hidden beneath layers of varnish and time. This particular portrait had come from an estate sale in Boone, North Carolina, part of a collection being dispersed after the death of Margaret Whitmore, a 97-year-old woman who had been the last living descendant of one of the region's founding families. The portrait had been discovered tucked away in Margaret's attic, its ornate frame covered in decades of dust and cobwebs. The canvas showed significant signs of environmental damage. Temperature fluctuations and humidity had caused the paint to crack, creating a network of fine lines across the surface. Previous owners, well-intentioned but untrained, had attempted amateur repairs that had actually caused more harm than good. The conservation center itself occupied a renovated textile mill from the early 1900s. Its red brick exterior and original hardwood floors gave the building a sense of history that Sarah found appropriate for the work being done inside. Her workspace occupied a corner of the main floor, positioned to capture the best natural light during the day. Around her, 3 other conservators worked at their respective stations, each absorbed in their own delicate projects. The familiar smell of mineral spirits, linseed oil, and old canvas permeated the air, a scent that Sarah had come to associate with home. Marcus Chin, the center's director and Sarah's longtime colleague, approached her station carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. At 48, Marcus maintained the energetic demeanor of someone half his age, his enthusiasm for preservation work never having diminished since his graduate school days. His gray-streaked black hair was perpetually disheveled, and he had a habit of gesturing emphatically when discussing art, occasionally threatening to spill whatever beverage he happened to be holding. "How's our mysterious lady coming along?" Marcus asked, setting one mug carefully on a coaster beside Sarah's workspace. He peered over her shoulder at the portrait, his practiced eye immediately noting the areas where she had begun the delicate process of cleaning away decades of accumulated grime and yellowed varnish. "Slowly but surely," Sarah replied, accepting the coffee gratefully and taking a careful sip. "The canvas was in worse shape than I initially assessed. There's significant craquelure throughout the entire surface, and I've found at least 3 distinct areas where previous amateur restoration attempts actually caused additional damage. Someone, probably in the 1950s based on the materials, tried to fix a tear near her shoulder using what appears to be regular craft store glue, which has discolored badly over time." Marcus winced sympathetically. The usual nightmare. It's amazing how much damage well-intentioned people can do when they don't understand conservation principles. The good news is that the original paint layers are remarkably intact beneath all the surface problems. Whoever painted this had real skill and training. The brushwork is confident and precise, especially in the rendering of the fabric textures and the subtle modeling of her facial features. I'm thinking it might have been done by one of the itinerant portrait painters who traveled through the mountains in that era, someone with formal training who was making a living painting local families who could afford to commission work. Sarah had spent considerable time over the past weeks researching the historical context of the piece. The 1880s had been a transitional period in the Appalachian region. The railroad had begun extending its reach into previously isolated mountain communities, bringing with it new economic opportunities and cultural influences from the outside world. Families who had lived in relative seclusion for generations suddenly found themselves connected to broader commercial networks. Those who could afford it often commissioned portraits as a way of documenting their heritage and asserting their place in this rapidly changing world. The subject of this particular portrait remained frustratingly unidentified. The estate inventory had listed it simply as Portrait of Unknown Woman, circa 1885, oil on canvas. No documentation had survived to indicate who she was, who had painted her, or why the portrait had been created. This anonymity was not uncommon with pieces from that era and region, but it always troubled Sarah deeply. Every portrait represented a real person, someone who had lived and breathed and experienced joy and sorrow, someone who had their own unique story. To have that identity lost to time felt like a small tragedy, a life reduced to anonymous decoration. "Have you made any progress on identifying her?" Marcus asked, echoing Sarah's thoughts as he often did after years of working together. "Nothing concrete yet. I've been going through census records and local historical archives during my lunch breaks, but without more specific information to narrow the search, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack the size of 3 counties. The Whitmore family tree is extensive and complicated, with branches spreading across the entire region. She could be a direct ancestor, or she might be connected through marriage, or she might not even be related to the Whitmores at all. The portrait could have been acquired from another family line entirely, or inherited through a distant connection." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, studying the woman's face. "Well, keep at it. There's something compelling about her expression, something haunting. I'd love to know her story, to understand what she was thinking when she sat for this portrait." He gestured toward the windows, where the afternoon rain showed no signs of letting up. "I'm heading out early to beat the worst of the storm. The Weather Service is predicting some serious flooding in the lower elevation areas tonight. Will you be okay closing up by yourself?" "Of course. I want to finish cleaning this section of the face before I call it a day anyway. I'm making good progress and I'd like to maintain momentum." After Marcus left, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, Sarah returned her full attention to the portrait. She was currently engaged in the painstaking process of removing the old varnish layer, a task that required infinite patience and an extremely delicate touch. Too much pressure or the wrong solvent mixture could damage the original paint irreparably, destroying in seconds what had survived for over a century. She worked in small sections, using cotton swabs dipped in a carefully measured mixture of solvents, gently rolling away the yellowed coating to reveal the true colors beneath. As the afternoon progressed into evening, the other conservators gradually departed, their goodbyes echoing in the increasingly empty space. Sarah barely registered their leaving, her focus narrowed to the square inch of canvas currently under her attention. The rain continued its assault on the windows with renewed intensity, and occasional rumbles of thunder rolled across the distant mountains. The overhead lights created pools of warm illumination in the gathering darkness, giving the workshop an almost theatrical atmosphere that Sarah found strangely comforting. To be 7 o'clock, Sarah had made significant and satisfying progress. The woman's face was now almost completely cleaned, and the transformation was nothing short of remarkable. What had appeared to be muddy browns and dull grays beneath the degraded varnish now revealed itself as a subtle and sophisticated palette of warm ochres, delicate pinks, and carefully blended flesh tones. The woman's eyes, in particular, had taken on a new depth and startling intensity. They seemed to look directly at the viewer with an unsettling directness, conveying an emotional weight and intelligence that the dirty varnish had completely obscured. Sarah sat back in her chair, rolling her shoulders to relieve the tension from hours of hunching over the workbench in the same position. She needed to examine the frame more carefully before deciding on her next conservation steps. The frame itself was a substantial piece of craftsmanship, hand-carved oak with elaborate corner decorations featuring acanthus leaf motifs. It was contemporary with the painting, probably created specifically for this portrait rather than being a later edition. The wood had darkened with age to a deep chocolate brown, and the ornate carvings were filled with accumulated dust and dirt that would need to be carefully cleaned. She carefully lifted the portrait, supporting it from beneath, and carried it to a different workstation equipped with better adjustable lighting for examining structural elements. Setting it down gently on the padded surface, she began a methodical inspection of the frame, looking for any signs of damage, loose joints, or instability that might need to be addressed as part of the overall restoration. Her trained fingers moved along the carved surfaces, checking joints, examining the backing board, testing for any weakness in the structure as she worked her way around the perimeter, checking each corner and edge with meticulous care. Her finger caught on something unexpected. There was a slight gap between the backing board and the frame's inner edge, noticeably wider than it should have been. Sarah frowned and leaned closer, angling her adjustable work light to illuminate the narrow space more clearly. Something was definitely wedged in there, something that wasn't part of the original construction or a natural result of aging. Her heart rate quickened slightly with anticipation. Years of experience had taught her that old frames sometimes concealed surprises, documents, photographs, letters, even currency, items that families had hidden away for safekeeping during uncertain times and then forgotten about over the generations. Each discovery was like opening a time capsule, a direct connection to the past. She reached for a pair of thin conservation tweezers and a small magnifier with an attached light. Working with extreme care to avoid damaging whatever was hidden there, she began to tease the object free from its hiding place. It appeared to be paper, yellowed and brittle with considerable age. After several minutes of painstaking work, gently working the paper back and forth to loosen it without tearing, she managed to extract a folded piece of what looked like writing paper, approximately 4 inches by 6 inches. When folded, Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she carried the paper to a pristine work surface she had prepared for examining delicate documents. This was exactly the kind of discovery that conservators dreamed about, a direct connection to the past, potentially providing context and meaning to the object they were preserving. She took several moments to photograph the folded paper from multiple angles with her high-resolution camera, carefully documenting its condition and position before any further handling, creating a record of the discovery exactly as she had found it. Then, using wooden conservation tools rather than metal tweezers that might cause additional damage or leave marks, she began the delicate process of unfolding the paper. The paper was extremely fragile, its edges crumbling slightly at even her gentlest touch despite all her caution and experience. The creases where it had been folded were particularly vulnerable, the paper fibers having broken down significantly over more than a century of compression. Sarah worked slowly and methodically, supporting each section carefully as she opened it, her breathing shallow with concentration and anticipation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes, the paper lay completely flat before her, revealing several lines of faded ink in a careful, educated hand. The writing was in English, the penmanship reflecting the formal style taught in schools of that era, with elegant loops and careful letter formation. The ink had faded over time to a rusty brown color, and several words were partially obscured by foxing, brown spots caused by moisture and fungal growth over the long decades. But enough remained legible to send chills down Sarah's spine. To whoever finds this, the message began, the opening words still clear and readable. I write these words in the hope that someday, someone will understand what truly happened. My name is Catherine Eleanor Brennan, and the portrait before you is my likeness, painted in the spring of 1885 when I was 24 years old. By the time you read this, I will likely be long dead, but the truth deserves to be known, and I could not let it die with me. Sarah read the words 3 times, each reading bringing new understanding and raising new questions. Finally, a name for the woman in the portrait, Catherine Eleanor Brennan. But more than that, the tone of the message suggested a story, something significant and troubling enough that Catherine had felt compelled to hide this confession within the frame of her own portrait, trusting it to an uncertain future. The rest of the message was unfortunately more difficult to decipher. Several lines were badly faded, and water damage at some point in the paper's history had rendered portions completely illegible, frustrating gaps in Catherine's testimony. Sarah could make out tantalizing fragments, something about the mine, and what they told everyone, and the truth about that winter. There was a date mentioned quite clearly, December 1884, and what appeared to be references to other people, though their names were among the illegible sections, lost to time and deterioration. The final paragraph was the clearest, as if Catherine had pressed harder with her pen in her determination that these words at least would survive to be read. I have lived with this knowledge for months now, and it has nearly broken me. The weight of it grows heavier each day. I cannot speak of it aloud. The consequences would be too severe, not just for me but for others I hold dear. But neither can I take it to my grave without leaving some record, some testimony that what happened was wrong and that I knew it. If you have found this message, I ask that you try to uncover what truly occurred in those dark months. The people deserve to know. The dead deserve to be remembered accurately. And I deserve to have told the truth at least once, even if only in secret, hidden in the only way I could manage. Sarah realized she had been holding her breath as she read. She exhaled slowly and reached for her phone with trembling fingers, pulling up Marcus's number. This discovery changed absolutely everything about what had seemed like a routine restoration project. It transformed the work from simple conservation into something far more complex and meaningful, a historical mystery that demanded investigation, a voice from the past asking to be heard. Marcus answered on the third ring, his voice showing surprise at the late call. "Sarah? Is everything all right? You're still at the center?" "Marcus, you need to come back immediately. I found something hidden in the frame of the Appalachian portrait. A message written by the subject herself. Her name was Catherine Eleanor Brennan, and she's telling us there's a truth that needs to be uncovered, something about events in December 1884. This isn't just a portrait anymore. It's a testimony, a plea for help across more than a century." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of keys jingling and a door opening. "I'm leaving right now. Don't touch anything else until I get there. Document everything exactly as it is. Sarah, this could be historically significant. We need to handle it properly." After hanging up, Sarah returned her attention to the message, reading it again with fresh eyes and growing fascination. Catherine's words carried a palpable weight of desperation and courage. Whatever she had witnessed or learned about had been serious enough that she feared speaking of it openly, yet important enough that she couldn't let it be forgotten entirely. The hidden message represented a carefully calculated act of quiet rebellion, a way of preserving truth in an era and place where a woman's testimony might be dismissed as unreliable or even dangerous to voice publicly. Sarah looked back at the portrait itself, seeing it now with completely new understanding. Catherine's expression, that distinctive mixture of determination and sadness that had first caught Sarah's attention, took on profound new meaning. This was a woman carrying a significant burden of knowledge, someone who had witnessed or learned something that had changed her fundamentally, marked her in ways that the artist had somehow captured on canvas. The portrait had been painted in spring 1885, which meant it was created several months after the events of December 1884 that Catherine referenced in her hidden message. Whatever had happened that winter had been recent enough to be fresh and raw in her memory, recent enough to haunt those expressive eyes. The workshop felt different now, charged with the weight of history made suddenly and powerfully personal. Outside, the storm had intensified even further, rain sheeting against the windows in waves and wind rattling the old building's bones with increasing force. Sarah carefully covered the unfolded message with a sheet of conservation-grade mylar to protect it from any environmental changes or accidental damage, then turned back to study the portrait itself with this new context. She examined Catherine's face with renewed intensity and purpose, looking for additional clues in the painting that might connect to the mysterious message. The artist had captured something essential about their subject, not just her physical appearance with technical skill, but something deeper, something of her inner emotional state. There was clear intelligence in those eyes, and unmistakable integrity, but also fear that was being carefully controlled and concealed. Catherine had sat for this portrait knowing she was concealing something dangerous and important, and some echo of that knowledge, that internal struggle, had inevitably made its way onto the canvas, captured by an observant artist. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, his jacket thoroughly soaked from the dash through the downpour from his car to the building entrance. He shed the wet garment and hurried over to Sarah's workstation, his eyes immediately drawn to the protected message lying on the illuminated work surface, anticipation clear on his face. "Show me everything," he said simply, his voice tight with controlled excitement. Sarah carefully removed the mylar covering and stepped back, allowing Marcus to read Catherine's words for himself without hovering. She watched his expression change as he processed the content, his initial excitement giving way to the same sense of profound gravity and responsibility that had settled over her like a weight. "This is extraordinary," Marcus said quietly after reading it through twice. "And potentially complicated in ways we need to think through carefully. This isn't just about art conservation anymore, Sarah. We've stumbled into someone's personal history, someone's deliberately hidden testimony about events that clearly had serious implications for multiple people. We're being asked to investigate something that happened over 140 years ago." "I know. But we can't just ignore it, Marcus. We can't just treat this like an interesting historical footnote and move on with the restoration." Catherine wrote this specifically hoping someone would find it and investigate. She's reaching out across more than a century, asking for help in uncovering the truth about something that clearly tormented her. We have a responsibility to respond to that plea. Marcus nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Agreed completely. But we need to think carefully about the ethical dimensions here, the potential consequences. We don't know yet what we're going to uncover when we start investigating. These events happened in a small mountain community in the 1880s. There could very well be descendants still living in the area, families whose reputations or family histories might be significantly affected by whatever truth Catherine was hiding. We need to proceed thoughtfully and sensitively with respect for all the people involved." "So what do you suggest as our first steps?" "First, we document everything meticulously and professionally. We photograph the message from every conceivable angle. We get it properly stabilized and preserved by our paper conservation specialist. Then we start the research process. We need to find out who Catherine Eleanor Brennan was, her family, her life, her circumstances. What happened in December 1884 in whatever community she lived in. We search newspaper archives, county records, any historical documentation we can locate. We build a comprehensive context before we make any decisions about going public with this discovery or contacting potential descendants." Sarah felt a surge of determination flowing through her. This was precisely why she had become a conservator in the first place, not just to preserve physical objects, but to preserve and honor the stories and truths they contained, the human experiences they represented. Catherine had entrusted her message to an uncertain future, believing that someday, someone would care enough to listen and act. That faith couldn't be betrayed. "I'll start first thing tomorrow morning," Sarah said firmly. "I'll reach out to the historical societies in Boone and the surrounding counties, see what records they have from that specific period. I'll also contact some colleagues who specialize in Appalachian history and culture. Someone might have information about the Brennan family or about significant events in that area during the winter of 1884 to 1885. Marcus smiled, recognizing the familiar gleam of passionate curiosity in her eyes, the same intensity he had seen many times over their years of working together. "I know that look very well. You're not going to rest until you figure this out completely, are you? Would you, in my position?" "Not a chance," Marcus admitted with a slight laugh. "Not even for a moment. All right, let's get this message properly secured in climate-controlled storage for the night, and then we both need to go home and get some rest. Tomorrow, we start the process of unraveling a mystery that's been waiting more than 140 years to be solved." As they worked together to secure the message in the center's climate-controlled storage vault, taking every precaution to ensure its preservation, Sarah cast one more long glance at Catherine's portrait. The young woman's eyes seemed to hold a question now, a tentative hope that perhaps, finally, someone would hear what she had been unable to say aloud during her lifetime. "I'll find out what happened," Sarah whispered to the portrait, making a solemn promise. "I swear to you, Catherine, I'll uncover the truth. Your courage won't be wasted." The Watauga County Historical Society occupied a modest but well-maintained brick building on King Street in downtown Boone, nestled comfortably between a popular coffee shop and a used bookstore. Sarah pulled into the small parking lot just as the morning sun broke through the lingering clouds from the previous night's storm, casting long shadows across the wet pavement. She had barely slept, her mind churning relentlessly through possibilities about Catherine Brennan and the mystery she had left behind. Over a quick breakfast, she had compiled a detailed list of questions and potential research directions, organized carefully by priority and feasibility. The interior of the Historical Society was exactly what Sarah had expected based on years of visiting similar institutions, walls lined with framed photographs of stern-faced mountain families in their Sunday best, glass cases displaying carefully preserved artifacts from the region's past, and that particular distinctive smell of old paper, leather bindings, and preservation chemicals that was immediately familiar to anyone who spent significant time in archives. A woman in her 60s sat behind the reception desk, her silver hair cut in a practical bob, her reading glasses hanging from a colorful beaded chain around her neck. She looked up with a welcoming smile as Sarah entered. "Good morning," the woman said warmly. "I'm Dorothy Callahan, the Society's director. You must be Sarah Mitchell from the Conservation Center. Your email last night certainly piqued my curiosity. It's not every day we get urgent research requests about hidden messages in portrait frames." Sarah shook her hand, grateful for the immediately welcoming reception. "Thank you so much for seeing me on such short notice. I know this is somewhat irregular, and I really appreciate your flexibility." "Irregular is exactly what makes this job interesting after 30 years, Dorothy replied with a knowing smile. "The routine cataloging gets tedious. Let's go back to my office where we can spread out and talk properly. Would you like some coffee? Fair warning, it's strong enough to strip paint off walls." In Dorothy's cluttered but clearly well-organized office, surrounded by filing cabinets and stacks of historical documents arranged in careful piles, Sarah explained the discovery of Catherine's message in detail. She had brought high-resolution photographs of both the message and the portrait, which she spread out carefully on Dorothy's desk. The older woman examined them with intense concentration, her expression growing more focused and intent as she read Catherine's faded words. "Catherine Eleanor Brennan," Dorothy murmured thoughtfully, reaching for a well-worn notebook from her desk drawer. "The name is definitely familiar, but I can't immediately place it in context. Let me check my indexes. The 1880s, you said?" She flipped through pages covered in her own neat handwriting. Apparently, Dorothy kept extensive personal indexes of the families and significant events she had researched over her decades at the Society. "Here we are. Brennan." There were several Brennan families in the county during that period. Irish immigrants, mostly, who came here in waves during the 1840s and 50s to escape the famine. They worked primarily in timber harvesting and mining operations. "The message mentions something about the mine," Sarah said, pointing to one of the partially legible sections of Catherine's note. "Does that help narrow down which Brennan family we're looking at?" Dorothy nodded thoughtfully, her fingers already moving toward one of her filing cabinets. "It might indeed. There were numerous small mining operations scattered through these mountains in that era. Mica, feldspar, some iron or deposits. Most were modest family operations, nothing like the large commercial mining companies you'd find further west in the state. Let me pull our compiled mining records for that specific period." She moved efficiently to one of the tall filing cabinets and extracted a thick folder, laying it out on the desk with practiced care. "These are compiled from county tax records, land deeds, and contemporary newspaper accounts. Any mining operation, even a very small one, had to file certain documentation with the county clerk for tax purposes." She ran her finger down a carefully typed index. "Brennan. Thomas Brennan registered a mica mining operation on property near Blowing Rock in 1878. The operation appears to have been reasonably active and productive through the mid-1880s, then abruptly ceased all production in 1886. That's interesting timing." Sarah felt a jolt of excitement run through her. Could Catherine have been related to this Thomas Brennan? A daughter, perhaps? Very likely. Let me check the census records, which should give us family compositions. Dorothy moved to her computer and pulled up a genealogical database with impressive speed. Her fingers flew over the keyboard with the practiced efficiency of someone who had conducted thousands of similar searches. Here we are. The 1880 federal census for Watauga County. Thomas Brennan, age 48, born in County Cork, Ireland, occupation listed as mine owner and operator. Living with him at the time of the census. She scrolled down carefully. His wife Mary Brennan, age 45, also born in Ireland, and 3 children still at home. Catherine Eleanor Brennan, age 19 at the time of the 1880 census, Helen Margaret Brennan, age 16, and James Patrick Brennan, age 13. That's her, Sarah breathed, leaning forward with excitement. Catherine would have been exactly 24 in 1885 when the portrait was painted and the message was written. Can you see anything else about the family composition or circumstances? Dorothy continued reading from the screen. The household also included 2 hired laborers living on the property, which was quite common for mining families of any success. The property value is listed as moderate for the area. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they were certainly established and reasonably prosperous. The mine must have been providing decent income at that point. She looked up from the screen, her eyes bright with the excitement of discovery. You said Catherine's message mentioned December 1884. Let me check if we have any newspaper archives from that specific period that might mention the Brennan family or any incidents. She led Sarah to a different section of the building, a carefully climate-controlled room housing bound volumes of historical newspapers, the spines labeled with dates. The Watauga Democrat is our oldest continuous publication, founded in 1888, but there were several other papers operating in the 1880s that didn't survive as long. Most didn't survive in complete runs, unfortunately, but we have significant portions of several publications. She pulled down several heavy leather-bound volumes with care. Winter of 1884 to 1885. Let's start looking systematically. For the next 2 intensive hours, Sarah and Dorothy carefully paged through the fragile newspapers, their eyes scanning column after column of small print, searching for any mention of the Brennan family or unusual events occurring in December 1884. The papers were filled with the ordinary daily concerns of small mountain communities. Announcements of marriages and deaths, advertisements for general stores and dubious patent medicines, reports on timber sales and property transactions, occasional pieces about local politics and disputes over land boundaries and water rights. Then, in the December 18, 1884 edition of the Watauga Democrat, they found something significant. Dorothy's hand stopped moving, her finger marking a spot on the page. "Sarah, look at this carefully," Dorothy said quietly, her voice tense with discovery. The headline, printed in bold type, read, "Tragic accident at Brennan Mine claims 2 lives." Sarah leaned closer, her heart pounding as she read the article. A terrible accident occurred on Tuesday last at the mica mining operation operated by Mr. Thomas Brennan on his property near Blowing Rock. 2 workers employed at the mine, William Patterson, age 26, and Samuel Howell, age 31, were killed instantly when a section of the mine shaft collapsed during routine extraction operations. Mr. Brennan, who was present at the time of the tragic accident, immediately organized rescue efforts, but both men were found to have perished from their injuries before help could reach them. The bodies were recovered and have been returned to their grieving families for proper burial. Mr. Patterson leaves behind a young wife and infant daughter. Mr. Howell was unmarried but is survived by his elderly parents. The cause of the collapse is currently under investigation by county authorities, though initial reports suggest it resulted from a natural instability in the rock formation. Mining operations at the site have been suspended indefinitely pending the outcome of the investigation. Our community extends its deepest sympathies to the bereaved families in this time of sorrow. Sarah and Dorothy looked at each other, the implications hanging heavy in the air between them. "This has to be what Catherine was referring to in her message," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. 2 men died in her father's mine in December 1884, and just a few months later, she hides a message saying that the truth about that winter needs to be known, that what they told everyone publicly wasn't accurate. She's suggesting the official story about the mine collapse wasn't true. Dorothy's expression was deeply troubled. But what could have really happened that would require lying about it? And why would the family participate in covering up the truth about how these men died? Let's keep looking through subsequent editions. There must be more coverage of this incident. They continued methodically through the following week's newspapers. The next relevant mention came in the December 25th issue, a brief notice reporting that the funerals for both men had been held with large attendance from the community, and that the county investigation had officially concluded the collapse was due to natural geological causes, with absolutely no negligence found on the part of the mine owner. The case was formally and officially closed, but in the January 8, 1885 edition, they discovered something else that made Sarah's pulse quicken: a letter to the editor, unsigned but clearly written by someone with strong feelings about the accident and its investigation. To the editor: while this correspondent shares fully in the general sympathy expressed by our community for the families affected by the recent tragedy at the Brennan mining operation, one must ask whether sufficient and thorough investigation was truly conducted into the circumstances of the collapse. Were proper safety measures in place at the mine? Were the workers adequately trained in safe mining practices? Had there been previous warnings or concerns about the stability of that particular section of the shaft? It seems to this observer that the matter was concluded with unusual haste, leaving important questions unanswered and concerns unaddressed. The dead deserve justice and truth, not merely sympathy and hasty conclusions. Someone else in the community had serious doubts, Sarah said, her mind racing. Someone questioned publicly whether the investigation was actually thorough or just a formality. Dorothy made careful notes in her notebook. Anonymous letters were quite common in newspapers of that era. People could raise concerns or criticize powerful community members without risking direct confrontation or social consequences for themselves or their families. But notice how this ends. There's no follow-up in subsequent editions, no further discussion of the safety issues raised, no response from authorities. Whatever doubts existed in the community seemed to have been effectively silenced or simply dismissed. Sarah thought about Catherine's message, about her expressed fear of consequences if she spoke openly about what she knew. If there was indeed a cover-up of some kind, who would have benefited from it? What could the real cause of the accident have been that would require lying about it to the community and authorities? That's exactly the crucial question, isn't it? Dorothy said thoughtfully, "Let me show you something else that might be relevant." She pulled out a large, carefully preserved map of the county from that era, spreading it across the work table. Here's approximately where the Brennan property would have been located, based on the land deed descriptions in our records. It was relatively remote, up in the hills, accessed only by a rough wagon road. In winter, especially after heavy snow, it would have been quite isolated from the nearest town, making it much easier for something to happen without independent witnesses, Sarah observed, studying the map carefully. Exactly. And here's something else interesting to consider. Dorothy pointed to several other marked locations on the map. These are other mining operations that were active in the same general area during that same period. There was considerable competition for good mineral deposits, occasional disputes over property boundaries, conflicts over water rights needed for operations. Mining communities could be rough, contentious places, especially when significant money was involved and regulation was minimal. Sarah studied the map intently, trying to imagine the landscape as it would have been in 1884, primitive roads, small scattered communities, limited reach of law enforcement. In such an environment, powerful families with money and connections could potentially control narratives, suppress unwelcome truths, and ensure that investigations reached conclusions favorable to their interests. We need to find out significantly more about William Patterson and Samuel Howell, Sarah said decisively. The two men who died. Who were they exactly? What were their circumstances? Did their families truly accept the official explanation? Are there any surviving records, documents, or family members who might have preserved information? Dorothy nodded in agreement. That's excellent thinking. Let me check our burial records database. She returned to her computer and accessed another database. Here we are. William Patterson, buried at the Valle Cruces Cemetery on December 20, 1884. Samuel Howell, buried at the same cemetery on the same date. They were laid to rest side by side, actually. That's somewhat unusual unless there was a specific reason for it, either family request or community decision. Could we visit the cemetery? Sarah asked. Are the graves still there and maintained? Valle Cruces has an active preservation committee. The cemetery is in good condition, and many of the older markers have been documented and protected. We could certainly go there this afternoon, though I'm not entirely sure what you hope to find after so much time has passed. I'm not completely sure either. Sarah admitted. But I feel like I owe it to Catherine to be thorough, to follow every possible lead. She went to such great lengths to leave that message, to preserve some record of the truth. The absolute least I can do is exhaust every avenue of investigation. The drive to Via Crucis took them through stunning mountain scenery, the road winding alongside streams still swollen from the previous night's rain. The landscape was a beautiful patchwork of forested slopes showing autumn colors, small farms with grazing cattle, and occasional clusters of houses. Sarah tried to imagine Catherine traveling these same routes more than a century earlier, carrying her secret knowledge, burdened by truth she couldn't share, unable to speak openly about what she knew without destroying her family. Via Crucis Cemetery sat on a gently sloping hillside overlooking a peaceful valley, its weathered headstones arranged in roughly chronological sections. The oldest graves dated back to the early 1800s, simple markers for the hardy pioneers who had first settled this rugged country. Dorothy led Sarah confidently to a section with markers dated to the 1880s, where the stones were generally more elaborate, reflecting the increased prosperity of that era. "Here they are," Dorothy said quietly, pointing to two matching granite markers standing side by side under an old oak tree. The first marker read, "William Patterson, born March 15, 1858, died December 16, 1884. Beloved husband and father. May he rest in peace." The second read, "Samuel Howell, born June 3, 1853, died December 16, 1884. Gone but not forgotten." Sarah stood before the graves for a long moment, feeling the profound weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. Two men, young and vital and full of life, had entered a mine shaft one winter morning expecting to return home that evening, and instead they never returned. Their families had grieved deeply, their children had grown up without fathers, and whatever really happened in that dark shaft had been buried along with them, the truth hidden beneath official lies and convenient explanations. "Look at this," Dorothy said, kneeling carefully beside William Patterson's marker. At the base of the stone, someone had placed a small bouquet of dried wildflowers, relatively recent judging by their condition. Someone still tends these graves and remembers. After all these years, someone in the community or family still comes here and remembers these men. Sarah pulled out her phone and carefully photographed both markers, documenting their condition, inscriptions, and exact placement. As she moved around William Patterson's stone to get a better angle, she noticed something carved into the back of the marker, hidden from casual view by anyone approaching from the main cemetery path. The letters were small and appeared to have been added later, carved with less professional skill than the main inscription on the front. "Dorothy, come look at this immediately." The older woman joined her, squinting at the faint carving weathered by decades of exposure. It says, "Truth will prevail." And there's a date carved beneath it. 1886, a full year and a half after William's death, Sarah said, her mind racing through implications. Someone came back to this grave and added this message. Someone who believed there was a truth that needed acknowledging, that would eventually come to light. It could very likely have been his widow, Dorothy suggested thoughtfully. Sarah Patterson, that was her name according to the burial records I saw. She would have been about 26 years old when William died, left with an infant daughter to raise alone. I wonder what became of her, where she went, whether she ever remarried. Can we find out? Can you trace her through records? Dorothy made another note in her ever-present notebook. I'll research it thoroughly when we get back to the society. We should also look carefully into the Howell family. If both families had serious doubts about the official story, there might be records somewhere, letters, diaries, or oral histories passed down through subsequent generations. As they walked slowly back to Dorothy's car, Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Marcus at the Conservation Center. "Sarah, where are you right now? We've had an unexpected visitor here asking specifically about the Appalachian portrait. A man named Brennan, Robert Brennan. He says he's a direct descendant of the family and he heard through the estate sale attorney that we were doing restoration work on a family piece. He wants to see the portrait and learn more about its history and provenance." Sarah's pulse quickened noticeably. "What's his first name again?" "Robert Brennan. He lives here in Asheville currently," says his great-great-grandfather was Thomas Brennan, who owned a mica mine near Blowing Rock back in the 1880s. Sarah, do you want me to tell him anything at all about what we found in the frame? No, Sarah said quickly and firmly. Not yet. We don't know enough. Tell him the restoration is still in process and that we'll be in touch when we have more comprehensive information to share. Get his complete contact details, but absolutely don't mention the hidden message or our investigation. Understood completely. Is everything okay? I'm not sure yet. I'll explain everything when I get back to the center. I should be there in about an hour. After ending the call, Sarah relayed the conversation to Dorothy with obvious concern. That certainly complicates things considerably, Dorothy said thoughtfully as they got into her car. If he's a direct descendant, he might have access to family stories, documents, or information that could help our investigation significantly. But he might also have a strong vested interest in protecting the family reputation and controlling whatever narrative emerges. Exactly what I'm thinking, Sarah agreed. We need to know substantially more before we approach him or reveal what we found. What if the Brennan family was genuinely responsible for whatever really happened? What if there was serious negligence or something even worse, and they successfully covered it up? We can't just hand this information over to a family member without understanding the full context and implications. Back at the Historical Society, Dorothy settled into intensive research mode with impressive focus and efficiency. She pulled up property records, court documents, and additional newspaper archives while Sarah reviewed and organized everything they had learned so far. The more they dug into the records, the more complex and troubling the picture became. I've found the official records of the county investigation into the mine accident, Dorothy said, reading from a scanned document on her screen. It was conducted by the county sheriff and lasted exactly 3 days. December 16th through December 19th, 1884. Only 3 days to investigate 2 deaths. They interviewed Thomas Brennan, examined the mine shaft briefly, and concluded it was an unfortunate accident caused by structural instability. Case officially closed. 3 days seems remarkably, almost suspiciously fast, Sarah observed. Especially in winter, when travel would have been difficult and conditions challenging. Here's something else quite interesting. Thomas Brennan's mine actually continued to operate until 1886, a full year and a half after the accident that supposedly demonstrated the mine was structurally unsound. If the mine was truly as dangerous as the investigation claimed, why would it have been allowed to reopen at all? And why would it take another year and a half to finally shut down permanently? What happened specifically in 1886 that caused the final shutdown? Dorothy searched through more property records and legal documents. Economic reasons, according to the land transfer documents. The mine was sold to a timber company who wanted the property primarily for logging rights. The mine shaft itself was filled in and permanently abandoned. But, she paused, reading more carefully, the sale price seems unusually low for a functional mining operation with established production. It's as if Thomas Brennan wanted to be rid of the property quickly, even at a significant financial loss. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities and scenarios. What if the accident triggered something in the community? What if workers refused to return to work there, or community members began asking too many uncomfortable questions, and continuing to operate the mine became socially or practically impossible? That would fit with the pattern we're seeing in the records. And look at this. Dorothy pulled up another document with obvious excitement. In 1887, Thomas Brennan and his entire family moved to Tennessee. They sold all their remaining property in Watauga County and relocated completely. That's a very significant move for an established family with deep roots in the community spanning decades. They fled, Sarah said quietly, the realization settling over her. Something made them leave, made staying here impossible or unbearable. Maybe I'm tired and letting my imagination run beyond the evidence, Dorothy said, though her tone suggested she believed her own interpretation was sound. What we need is more concrete, documentary evidence. Personal letters, private diaries, legal records that go beyond the official investigation. Something that shows directly what really happened in that mine shaft. Sarah checked the time on her phone. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon, and she needed to get back to the conservation center to deal with Robert Brennan's visit. "Thank you so much for all your help today, Dorothy. You've given me so much valuable information to work with." "This has been absolutely fascinating, Sarah. I haven't felt this energized about a research project in years. Listen, let me continue digging through our archives and reaching out to colleagues. I'll contact people at other historical societies in the region. If there are any surviving family papers from the Pattersons, Howells, or other contemporary families, someone in the regional historical community might know about them or have leads." As Sarah drove back to Asheville, her mind kept returning obsessively to Catherine's portrait, to those intelligent, haunted eyes that had first captured her attention. She thought about the young woman sitting for that portrait just months after witnessing or learning about something terrible, carrying that knowledge in complete silence, knowing she couldn't speak of it without severe consequences. The portrait had been commissioned as a family record, but Catherine had left another kind of record hidden within its frame, a testimony for the future, a desperate plea for truth. When Sarah arrived back at the conservation center, Marcus was waiting with detailed notes from his conversation with Robert Brennan. The descendant had been polite but persistent, clearly very interested in the portrait and its history. He had mentioned that he was compiling an extensive family genealogy and was eager to include any information about the portrait and its subject. "He's coming back tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock, Marcus said. He asked specifically if we had found anything unusual or unexpected during the restoration process. I kept my response vague and non-committal, but he seemed to already suspect or know that we might have discovered something significant." "That's concerning," Sarah said, frowning. "How would he know to ask that specific question?" "Maybe he doesn't know anything specific at all, but he's aware that old frames sometimes conceal hidden items. It's not uncommon knowledge among people interested in antiques. Or maybe there's some family lore about Catherine having secrets or leaving hidden messages. Either way, we need to decide carefully how we're going to handle tomorrow's conversation." Sarah thought about Dorothy's research, about the highly suspicious circumstances surrounding the mine accident, about Catherine's desperate message. "I think we need more solid answers before we reveal what we found to a family member. If the Brennan family was involved in covering up the truth about those deaths, Robert might not be the objective ally we need. We should meet with him, listen carefully to what he knows about family history, and see if we can learn anything useful without revealing our hand prematurely." "You're treating this like a criminal investigation," Marcus observed. "Because that's essentially what it is. Catherine asked whoever found her message to investigate, to uncover the truth. We're probably the first people who've had the opportunity to do that in over a century. We can't waste this chance, and we can't be careless with how we proceed." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression serious. "All right, I trust your judgment completely on this. But Sarah, be careful. We're dealing with events from a very long time ago, but they mattered deeply to the people involved. We have a responsibility to handle this sensitively." Robert Brennan arrived at the conservation center precisely at 2 o'clock the following afternoon. Through the large workshop window, Sarah watched him park a well-maintained silver sedan in the visitor spaces and retrieve a professional-looking leather briefcase from the passenger seat. He appeared to be in his late 50s, she estimated, with graying dark hair and the sturdy build of someone who maintained an active outdoor lifestyle. His clothing was professional but comfortably casual, pressed khaki pants, a crisp button-down shirt, and a lightweight jacket appropriate for the unseasonably warm October weather. Marcus met him at the main entrance, and Sarah joined them in the center's small conference room, where they had carefully positioned the restored portrait on an easel. They had deliberately arranged it so that the afternoon light from the windows would illuminate Catherine's features perfectly, making her seem almost alive, her knowing eyes following viewers as they moved around the space. "Mr. Brennan, this is Sarah Mitchell, our senior conservator," Marcus said, making formal introductions. "She's been leading the restoration work on your family portrait." Robert's handshake was firm and professional, his manner confident but not arrogant. "Please, call me Robert. Thank you both for taking the time to meet with me. I really appreciate it." His eyes moved immediately to the portrait, and Sarah watched his expression change noticeably, initial surprise, followed by what looked like genuine recognition, then something more complex and harder to read. "That's truly remarkable work," Robert said quietly, moving closer to study the portrait carefully. "I've seen old photographs of this painting from when it hung in my great-grandmother's house in Tennessee, but I never really looked at it closely or understood the quality. The restoration work has brought out so much subtle detail I never noticed in the photographs. You can really see the intelligence in her eyes, the strength of character, something determined about her expression." "You recognize her then?" Sarah asked carefully. "You know who she was?" "Oh yes, absolutely. This is Catherine Eleanor Brennan, my great-great-aunt. She was something of a legend in our family, actually. The independent one, the one who never married, who became a schoolteacher and lived life entirely on her own terms. In that era, for a woman to choose that unconventional path took considerable courage and determination." He turned to face them directly. "What can you tell me about the portrait's condition? Will it be stable for long-term display?" Marcus launched into a detailed technical discussion of the conservation work, describing the challenges of cleaning the degraded varnish, stabilizing the damaged canvas, and addressing the problems created by the amateur repair attempts. Sarah listened with half her attention, the other half focused intently on Robert's reactions. He seemed genuinely interested in the technical details, asking informed questions about materials and conservation methods. There was nothing immediately obvious in his demeanor to suggest he was hiding anything or had ulterior motives beyond legitimate interest in a significant family heirloom. When Marcus finished his explanation, Robert opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been working on compiling my family genealogy for about 5 years now. It started as a simple retirement project but has become something of an obsession, honestly. I've compiled quite a bit of information about the Brennan family line, including some interesting material specifically about Catherine." He laid out several photocopied documents on the conference table: census records, newspaper clippings, a carefully handwritten family tree showing multiple generations. Sarah moved closer, scanning the documents quickly. Most were things she had already seen in her own research with Dorothy, but a few items were new and potentially valuable. One was a photograph from the early 1900s showing an older Catherine standing in front of a small schoolhouse, surrounded by a large group of children of various ages. Her expression in the photograph was serene and content, and she looked nothing like the troubled young woman captured in the portrait. "She taught elementary school for over 30 years, Robert explained, following Sarah's gaze to the photograph. "Small town outside Nashville, Tennessee. By all accounts I've been able to find, she was absolutely beloved by her students and deeply respected by the entire community. She left a small but meaningful endowment to the school when she died in 1942, ensuring it could continue operating even during the difficult Depression years when funding was scarce." "She never married?" Marcus asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Oh, never. There's persistent family lore about a romance that ended badly when she was young, but I've never found any concrete historical details to verify it. My grandmother, Catherine's great-niece, used to say that Catherine had loved someone who wasn't suitable or acceptable to the family, and it broke her heart permanently. But you know how family stories get embellished and romanticized over multiple generations of retelling." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Could the secret Catherine had carried have involved a personal relationship as well as the mine accident? Or was the romance story simply a comfortable fiction, a socially acceptable explanation for why a woman had chosen independence over marriage? "I understand the portrait came from the Margaret Whitmore estate," Robert continued. "How exactly it ended up in Margaret's possession is a bit of a mystery to me. She was related to the Brennan family through her mother's side, a distant cousin several times removed. Catherine must have given or left the portrait to that branch of the family at some point, though I haven't found documentation of when or why." "Did your grandmother or other family members ever mention specifically why Catherine and the family left North Carolina?" Sarah asked carefully, trying to keep her tone casual. It seems like quite an unusual and disruptive move for that era, for an entire established family to relocate. Robert's expression became more thoughtful and guarded. There were various explanations offered over the years. The official family story was that my great-great-grandfather Thomas, Catherine's father, wanted to be closer to his brother who had settled in Tennessee earlier. There was also mention of better economic opportunities in Tennessee as mining declined in North Carolina. But he paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. There were also persistent hints of some kind of family scandal or serious difficulty. Nothing specific, just vague references to troubles that made starting fresh somewhere new appealing to the family. What kind of troubles specifically? Marcus asked. That's where the family stories get contradictory and unclear. Some versions suggest it was financial, debts, or failed business ventures. Other versions hint at social difficulties, maybe serious conflicts with neighbors or other community members. My grandmother once mentioned something about a terrible accident at the mine, workers who died, and legal problems afterward. But she was very young when she heard these stories from her mother, and details had already become fuzzy or deliberately obscured. Sarah and Marcus exchanged meaningful glances. This was valuable confirmation that some knowledge of the mine accident had been passed down through the family, even if the specific details had been lost or deliberately obscured over time. The accident at the mine, did your grandmother say anything specific about what happened or how it was resolved? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Robert shook his head. Not really, nothing detailed. Just that 2 men died in a collapse. It was very sad and tragic, and there were questions raised about whether proper safety measures had been in place. She said her grandfather Thomas was absolutely devastated by the accident, that it weighed on him heavily for the rest of his life. She always portrayed him as fundamentally a good man who tried to do right by his workers, but who was perhaps not experienced enough in mining operations to anticipate all the risks involved. That's certainly a generous interpretation, Sarah said before she could stop herself. Robert's eyes sharpened noticeably, his attention focusing intently on Sarah. You found something, haven't you? Something during the restoration that's changed how you view the portrait or the family history. Sarah felt Marcus tense beside her. This was the crucial moment of decision. They could continue to deflect and maintain secrecy, or they could trust Robert with what they had discovered and observe how he reacted. She thought about Catherine's message, about her remarkable courage in preserving the truth despite the personal risks. Catherine had wanted someone to investigate, to uncover what really happened. Perhaps Robert deserved the chance to help do that, even if it meant confronting uncomfortable truths about his family's past. Yes, Sarah said finally, meeting his gaze directly. We found something hidden in the portrait frame during restoration. A message, written by Catherine herself, about events surrounding the mine accident. She indicated clearly that what was publicly stated about the accident wasn't the complete truth. Robert sat down heavily in one of the conference chairs, his face noticeably paler. Show me, please. Sarah retrieved the carefully protected document from the conservation vault and brought it to the conference room. She removed the mylar covering with practiced care and laid Catherine's message on the table in front of Robert. He read it slowly and carefully, his lips moving slightly as he processed the faded words. When he finished, he sat back with a long, shaky exhalation, reading it again. So it's actually true, he said quietly, almost to himself. There was a cover-up. Something happened at that mine that the family deliberately lied about. You suspected this? Marcus asked gently. Not consciously, but there were always gaps in the family stories, things that didn't quite add up when you thought about them carefully. Why would a successful businessman suddenly sell everything at a loss and move away? Why did Catherine remain single and seem to maintain emotional distance from the rest of the family, even though they all lived in the same Tennessee town for decades? Why were there no photographs or memorabilia from the North Carolina years preserved in the family, as if that entire period had been deliberately erased from family memory? He looked directly at Sarah. What have you learned? What really happened at that mine? Sarah explained their research systematically, the suspiciously brief investigation, the out-of-court settlement with Samuel Howell's parents, the criminal case that had been initiated and then dismissed, the defiant messages left on William Patterson's gravestone and in Catherine's hidden note. We don't have all the pieces yet, Sarah admitted honestly. We're still trying to access sealed court records and track down descendants of the victims who might have family papers or oral histories. But the pattern we're seeing suggests your great-great-grandfather Thomas was somehow responsible for those deaths, either through serious negligence or possibly something worse, and that the family used their influence and money to avoid consequences. Robert absorbed this information silently, his hands folded on the table in front of him, his expression troubled. Finally he spoke. My great-great-grandfather was not a poor man. The mine was genuinely successful, and the family had significant land holdings throughout the area. In small mountain communities, that kind of wealth carried substantial influence and power. If he wanted an investigation shut down quickly, if he wanted to avoid prosecution or serious consequences, he probably had the means and connections to make that happen. How do you feel about that? Marcus asked gently, giving Robert space to process. Robert's laugh was bitter and short. How should I feel? Ashamed? Angry? Betrayed? These were my ancestors, but they're complete strangers to me. I never knew them, never met them. Their actions don't reflect on me personally. He paused, his expression becoming more determined. But at the same time, those two men who died, they had families, they had lives that were completely shattered by whatever negligence or wrongdoing occurred. Their descendants deserve to know the truth. Justice may be more than a century late, but it's still worth pursuing. Sarah felt a surge of relief wash over her. You'll help us then? You'll share whatever family information you have? Absolutely. And I can do more than that. I have contacts in Tennessee, including some distant family members who might have preserved old letters or documents from that period. I'll reach out to all of them and see what I can find. He gestured to Catherine's message with obvious respect. She wanted the truth known. As her descendant, I have a moral obligation to honor that wish, regardless of what it reveals about the family. Over the next hour, Robert shared everything he knew about the Brennan family history in detail. He had letters exchanged between family members from the 1890s and early 1900s, none of which directly mentioned the mine accident but which revealed telling information about the family dynamics of that period. Thomas Brennan, according to these letters, had become increasingly withdrawn and melancholy in his later years, drinking heavily and avoiding social contact. Mary Brennan had essentially run the household and managed all family finances. James, the son, had left home as soon as he was old enough, establishing both physical and emotional distance from his parents. Catherine stayed close to her mother and sister, Robert explained, but she and her father apparently had a very strained, difficult relationship. In one letter from Helen to a cousin, she mentions specifically that Catherine refuses to visit their parents' home when Thomas is present, and that Mary has to arrange separate times for Catherine's visits. That's extremely unusual behavior for that era, when family unity and respect for parents were deeply ingrained cultural values. Catherine knew what her father had done, Sarah said with conviction. She witnessed it or learned about it, and she couldn't forgive him for the deaths and the lies. But she also couldn't expose him publicly without destroying her mother and siblings socially and financially, Marcus added. So she maintained physical distance while keeping the secret. Robert nodded slowly. It must have been absolutely agonizing for her. She was trapped between loyalty to her family and her own conscience. The message in the portrait frame was her compromise: preserve the truth for the future without causing immediate harm to people she loved. Sarah thought about the photograph of older Catherine standing peacefully with her students, that serene expression on her lined face. Perhaps teaching had been her salvation, her way of building something positive and meaningful even while carrying the weight of the past. She had shaped young lives, contributed positively to her community, created a legacy separate from her father's sins. There's something else I should mention, Robert said, pulling out another document from his briefcase. I found this while researching property records in Tennessee. It's Thomas Brennan's will, filed with the court in 1903 after his death. He left the bulk of his estate to his wife Mary, with substantial provisions for James and Helen. But he specifically and deliberately excluded Catherine from any inheritance except for a very small monetary bequest. The will states explicitly that she has chosen her own path separate from this family and requires no further support from its resources. He disinherited her, Sarah said, anger rising in her voice. He knew she disapproved of what he'd done, and he punished her for it even after his death. It appears so. But here's the interesting part. After Mary died in 1911, her will divided the estate among all 3 children equally, specifically overriding Thomas's will regarding Catherine. She left Catherine a substantial sum along with some personal items including, and I quote, "all family documents and photographs in my possession, trusting that she will preserve them appropriately." Sarah's eyes widened with excitement. Family documents. Could those have survived? Do you know what happened to them after Catherine died? That's what I've been desperately trying to find out. Catherine taught school in the same small Tennessee town for her entire career. When she died in 1942, her few personal possessions were distributed among various family members. Helen's children, my great-grandparents, received most of her household items. But the documents? He trailed off, visibly frustrated. I haven't been able to trace them definitively. They either didn't survive the decades, or they're tucked away somewhere in a relative's attic, waiting to be rediscovered. We need to find them, Sarah said with determination. If Catherine preserved her mother's papers, and if Mary kept correspondence or journals from the North Carolina years, there might be direct evidence about what really happened at that mine. The conversation continued, and they developed a comprehensive research strategy. Robert would pursue the Tennessee family connections. Dorothy would continue her archival research in North Carolina and work on accessing the sealed court records. Sarah would focus on tracing the Patterson and Howell family lines, looking for descendants who might have relevant information. Marcus would coordinate the overall effort and handle any future interactions with the media or academic community if and when they were ready to make their findings public. Days passed in intensive research. Dorothy succeeded in getting the sealed court records opened through a historical research petition. The files confirmed everything, painting a damning picture. The case had been brought by the county prosecutor after sustained pressure from the Howell and Patterson families, but it had faced continuous obstacles. Witnesses had mysteriously become unavailable. Important documents had gone missing. The judge presiding over the case had undisclosed social and business ties to the Brennan family. The prosecutor's private notes, preserved in the file, revealed his deep frustration. This case should be straightforward. We have testimony from multiple witnesses that Brennan repeatedly ignored safety warnings. We have documentation that he had been previously cited for inadequate mine support structures. We have widows and orphaned children testifying eloquently to the impact of his negligence. But every possible path forward is systematically blocked by influence and money. Dorothy also located Samuel Howell's great-great-granddaughter, Linda Howell Thompson, who brought a box of precious family papers. Among them was a letter Samuel had written to his mother just 2 weeks before his death, its contents chilling in retrospect. The owner cares only for how much mica we extract each day, not for the safety of extracting it. I have told him 3 separate times about the weak support structures in the eastern shaft, and 3 times he has dismissed my concerns as overblown. If something terrible happens, it will be on his conscience, not mine. But Mother, I desperately need this work. The pay is good, and I am saving money to eventually buy my own land. I just wish the conditions were better and safer. Most significantly, Dorothy's colleague discovered Mary Fletcher Richmond's self-published family history from the 1960s. Mary was Sarah Patterson's granddaughter, and she had written a detailed chapter about her grandmother's first marriage and its tragic end. The account was devastating in its specificity, providing the direct testimony they had been seeking. 3 months later, the Asheville Heritage Conservation Center's main gallery had been transformed for the special exhibition. Soft, carefully positioned lighting illuminated the displays, and descriptive panels guided visitors through a story that had been hidden for more than a century. At the center of it all hung Catherine Eleanor Brennan's portrait, fully restored to its original beauty, her intelligent gaze now watching over the revelation of the truth she had worked so hard to preserve. The exhibition was titled Hidden Testimony, a story of courage and justice delayed, and it had been 3 intensive months in the making. Sarah, Marcus, Dorothy, and Robert had worked tirelessly to present their findings in a way that was both scholarly rigorous and emotionally accessible to general audiences. They had consulted extensively with historians, ethicists, and descendants of all the families involved. Every claim was meticulously documented, every quote was properly sourced, and every interpretation was carefully supported by historical evidence. The opening night drew a significantly larger crowd than anyone had anticipated. Descendants of the Brennan, Patterson, and Howell families were present, along with academic historians, local journalists, and curious community members. Linda Howell Thompson stood with her extended family in front of a display case containing Samuel Howell's prophetic letter to his mother. Robert Brennan was nearby, engaged in quiet, respectful conversation with a woman Sarah recognized as a Patterson descendant who had traveled from Virginia specifically for the event. Sarah moved through the crowded gallery, observing people engage deeply with the story. The exhibition was structured chronologically and thoughtfully, beginning with comprehensive historical context about Appalachian mining in the 1880s, the economic pressures, limited safety regulations, and conditions that made fatal accidents tragically common. Then it introduced the people involved with dignity: Thomas Brennan and his family, William Patterson and his young widow and infant daughter, Samuel Howell and his aging parents who would outlive their son. The next major section detailed the accident itself, using contemporary newspaper accounts, the official investigation report, and later testimonies to show clearly what happened on that December morning. The displays made unmistakably clear the repeated warnings that had been ignored, the safety measures that had been deemed too expensive to implement, the calculated choice to prioritize profit over human life. A particularly powerful section focused on the aftermath: the suspiciously brief investigation, the hastily closed case, the attempted prosecution that failed. Visitors could read excerpts from court documents, see letters from the frustrated prosecutor expressing his helplessness, and examine testimony that had been systematically dismissed or ignored. The message was devastatingly clear: the justice system had failed because power and money had corrupted it completely. But the emotional heart of the exhibition was Catherine's personal story. Her portrait dominated one wall, and around it were carefully arranged her hidden message, excerpts from her journals, and contextual information about her life and the difficult choices she faced. Visitors could understand not just what she had known, but what it had cost her personally to know it and to preserve that knowledge without destroying her family. Adjacent to Catherine's section was Sarah Patterson's story, her testimony, her long life carrying the burden of truth, her determination to pass it down to her granddaughter so it wouldn't be lost forever. The two women's stories ran deliberately parallel, showing two different but equally courageous approaches to preserving truth when speaking it aloud was impossible or dangerous. The final section explored broader, timeless themes: justice and accountability, the historically suppressed voices of women, the critical importance of documentary evidence, and the ongoing work of uncovering silenced stories in every community. It ended with a question posed directly to visitors: what truths in your own community might be hidden, waiting for someone to care enough to uncover them? That evening, newspapers ran prominent feature stories. The Asheville Citizen-Times headline read, "Portrait Restoration Reveals Century-Old Cover-Up of Mining Deaths." Academic journals contacted them about publishing detailed articles. A documentary filmmaker expressed serious interest in telling the story for broader audiences, but most meaningful to Sarah were responses from ordinary people who visited in subsequent weeks. A retired coal miner wrote in the visitor's book, "My grandfather died in a mine accident in 1947. The company said it was his fault. My grandmother never believed that but couldn't prove otherwise. Thank you for showing these stories matter, even generations later." 3 months after the exhibition opened, on a cold January morning, Sarah returned to Valle Crucis Cemetery. Robert Brennan met her there, along with Linda Howell Thompson, George Fletcher, Sarah Patterson's great-grandson, and other family descendants. They gathered solemnly at William Patterson's and Samuel Howell's graves. Sarah unveiled 2 new bronze plaques that would be permanently mounted beside the original stones, telling the complete truth: that these men had died due to deliberately neglected safety warnings and owner negligence at the Brennan mine, that their deaths had been covered up through wealth and influence, but that their stories had been preserved by courageous women and eventually brought to light. "This doesn't change what happened," Roberts said to the assembled group. "These men are still dead, their families still suffered immeasurably, and grave injustice still occurred. But having the truth acknowledged matters profoundly. Having it become part of the permanent historical record matters. My family's complicity in suppressing this truth was deeply wrong, and I'm grateful we've reached a point where we can admit that publicly and honor the victims properly. After the ceremony, descendants lingered in small groups, talking quietly. Barriers that might have existed, victim's family versus perpetrator's family, had dissolved completely. They were all just people dealing with shared, complicated history, finding common ground in the pursuit of truth and acknowledgement. 6 months after the exhibition opened, Sarah received an unexpected package from Tennessee. Inside was a letter from a distant relative of Catherine who had heard about the exhibition and their research. She had found something remarkable in old family papers, a letter Catherine had written to her sister Helen in 1940, just months before Catherine's death. "Dear Helen, I am writing this as I feel my time growing short and have thoughts I need to express. I have often wondered if hiding that message in my portrait was foolish. Who would find it? Who would care to investigate? I placed so much hope in an uncertain future, believing truth mattered enough that someone, someday, would pursue it. But I had to try. I had to do something. Those men deserved accurate memory. Their families deserved acknowledgement. And I deserved to have told the truth, even if only in whispers, to the future. I have lived a good life, despite the shadow father's actions cast. My students brought joy. My work gave purpose. And I kept my integrity intact, even when it cost me conventional happiness. If my message is never found, at least I tried. If it is found and investigated, perhaps some good can come from old tragedy. Either way, I am at peace. With love, Catherine." Sarah sat at her desk, Catherine's final letter in her hands, feeling the profound weight of connection across time. Catherine had doubted whether anyone would care. She had wondered if her act would matter. And now Sarah could finally answer those century-old questions. "Yes, Catherine. Someone found your message. Someone cared enough to investigate thoroughly. Your hope was completely justified. Your courage was not wasted. Truth did matter, exactly as you believed." Sarah carefully preserved the letter and added it to the archived materials. Then she returned to the gallery where Catherine's portrait still hung, the centerpiece of an exhibition that would continue for months before traveling to other museums. She stood before the portrait one final time, meeting Catherine's steady gaze, feeling profound completion. The mystery had been solved, truth revealed, and justice, however delayed, finally served. More than that, a message had been received across the vast distance of time, and the woman who sent it could finally be heard. "Thank you, Catherine," Sarah said quietly. "Thank you for believing the future would be better. For trusting that someone would care. You were absolutely right." The portrait's eyes seemed to hold peace now, as if Catherine's long vigil had finally ended. Truth had prevailed, exactly as Sarah Patterson Howell had defiantly carved into stone. And two remarkable women separated by more than a century had worked together, across an impossible gulf of time, to ensure that what happened in a dark mine shaft in December 1884 would not be forgotten or erased. The story was complete. The hidden testimony revealed. And the dead were remembered with honesty and dignity, exactly as Catherine had hoped.